Our gospel lesson this morning is found in Mark chapter 1, beginning with verse number 40. A leper came to him begging and kneeling and said to him, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, "I do choose, be made clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was clean. After sternly warning him, he sent him away at once, saying, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded as a testimony to them." But he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the word, so that Jesus could no longer go into a town openly, but stayed out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter. May God bless the reading and hearing of this word. May we hear in it a word that is to us and for us on this day. On Racial Justice Sunday, we are invited to celebrate the increments of progress, some of them substantial, which have been made in the fight against racial injustice. We are invited to celebrate the heroism of those who, through their courage and truth-telling, have helped make that progress possible. And we are invited to look with clear eyes at the work that still needs to be done. To look with clear eyes the admission of the hatred which still shouts in loud manners, and the racism which continues to damage the souls of those who stand on any side of it. And make no mistake, it damages all of our souls. And as much as anything, we are invited to know that we are made for more than that. In the opening chapter of the biography that some of us will be reading in coming days, King of Life, we are introduced to Martin Luther King Jr.'s father and his grandparents, Delia and Jim. They lived in a sharecropper's shack in Stockbridge, Georgia, a place about 20 miles south of Atlanta. It was 1910. The white man who owned the land kept most of the profits from the crops, while the King family, through hard labor, managed to make just enough to survive. King Sr. was about 12 years old at the time when his mother heard that a neighbor's cow had stopped giving milk. Her Christian values informed her of the importance of caring in tangible ways for her neighbors, and she sent 12-year-old Martin Luther King Sr. with a bucket full of milk to that neighbor. As he was making his way to the neighbor's house, he passed a sawmill, and he was startled to attention by the gruff voice of the sawmill owner, who said, "Hey boy, run get a bucket of water for me and my men down by the stream." King Sr., remembering and recalling this years later, recalls being apologetic but telling the sawmill owner that he was on an errand to help a neighbor in need. Angered and taking this as a sign of disrespect, the mill owner grabbed him by the shirt, kicked over the bucket of milk. And when the boy bent down to pick up the bucket in the hopes of retaining just some of its contents, the man kicked him in the ear and punched him in the face, causing blood to gush from his mouth. When King Sr. arrived home, his mother Delia coerced the information out of him about who had done this to him. And when he told her, she grabbed him by the arm and stormed down to the sawmill to confront the owner. He was surprised and irritated that she had enough courage to confront him like that, and he told her to get out of that place in no uncertain terms. Well, Delia King was not quite ready to leave, not yet. "Did you do this to my boy?" she demanded to know. And when he answered that he had in a tone that conveyed, "So what? And what are you going to do about it?" Well, many years later, her grandson, Martin Luther King Jr., would become one of the most famous advocates for nonviolent resistance. I don't know what Delia King thought about nonviolent resistance, but I do know, and I'm thankful, I will admit to you, that she chose a different form of resistance on this day. She lowered her shoulder, rammed into the man, knocked him into a shed, and then with arms and hands made strong by years and years of hard labor, she commenced to giving him the beating he had coming, if you asked me. "You can kill me," she said, "but if you put a hand on a child of mine, you will answer for it." She then balled up her fist again to see if he wanted any more, and his hands went up to say he'd had enough. They tried to keep all this from Jim King the father, knowing that a black woman might get away with this, but if a black man threatened a white man in 1910 in Stockbridge, Georgia, he would surely be lynched. He found out, however, and sure enough, he grabbed his rifle and he went down to the sawmill. The sawmill owner was not there, but his employees conveyed the threats that King made. And later that night, a group of cowards rode on horses to the King home with evil intentions. Jim King, the father, knew that he didn't have much recourse, and so he took off deep into the woods just to survive. He stayed there all throughout the fall and throughout the winter. The crops suffered, the family suffered. Delia, the mother, under the stress of it all, became sick, and the family barely made it through the winter. 12-year-old King Sr. eventually heard, though, through a friend, that the mill owner, months later, had decided to let it go. And he sent word to the King family, and I quote, "Things could return to normal." The father returned, but he had been changed. He'd become embittered. He drank more heavily, ceased to be able to take care and support his family. And despite the mill owner's promise, threats were still in the air, and the King family lived every day of their life in fear. The section ends with King Sr. later as an adult saying, "I wondered how long normal would last, and if this is what normal would always be." The book would later frame these realities in this manner. This fundamental unfairness permeated every aspect of American democracy, creating a tragic gap between what it was and what it was supposed to be. And everyone knew it. The only question was, how long could a nation go on failing to live up to its own moral code? Racial Justice Sunday invites us to be introspective, admitting that despite the progress which has been made, the jury is still out on that question. We're asked to think about what normal is and what normal isn't. And we are invited to consider the more that we as people, that we as a nation were made to be. In our text, Jesus encounters a man with leprosy. In the ancient Middle East, leprosy could be an umbrella term describing any number of skin diseases, some more painful and physically debilitating than others. What was common, though, for everyone relegated to the status of leper was that the physical suffering was only the beginning. Those afflicted were cut off from religious life. They were cut off from community life. When they passed by on the streets so that no one got too close to them, fingers pointed and said, "Unclean, unclean." They were untouchables. Moreover, there existed the common belief that it was their own sin which caused them to contract this disease, and all of those consequences which came with it were just the consequences of their own misdeeds. Pastor and scholar Alice McKenzie suggests a question that every community of faith should wrestle with when we have this passage before us. And it is this: as agents of Jesus' healing, who is it in our community who feels cut off and ashamed? There is no more important energy that a congregation can exert than the energy that we exert to answer that question. And once answered, to use our energy to remove every stigma which leaves human beings feeling cut off and ashamed. And lest we believe in our modern wisdom that people with illness are no longer isolated and cut off, let me tell you a story. For 6 months, I served as a hospice chaplain on a cancer treatment ward. In one area, there was this big room full of recliners. Most of the people there were hooked up to IVs, which were providing chemotherapy. Because everyone was in the same room, conversations generally stayed on the light side. As I remember, the O.J. Simpson trial was going on at the time, and everybody was talking about the O.J. Simpson trial and had an opinion about it. Occasionally, though, conversations would become deeper, and I became friends with a woman who I saw from the beginning of her treatment until its conclusion. By the time it ended, she showed all the weakened physical signs of a person who was suffering not only from the disease, but from the side effects of its treatment. She couldn't have weighed more than 70 pounds. I had noted that she not only took my hand when she spoke to me, but that when the nurses were standing near her, that she would take their hand, often holding one hand and stroking their arm with another hand. As her treatment was coming to an end, I remarked that she must be glad to have that over with. And she said most people felt that way, but that she dreaded its end. Because, she said, I'm not afraid of dying, but my heart breaks every day because when I'm not here and when I leave here, nobody touches me. Everybody is afraid. Who is it among us who feels isolated and cut off? Recently, a number of books were removed from the Moore County bookshelves. Now, I was not a part of that conversation, so I will not offer what would be a very uninformed opinion. Although, as far as I can tell, uninformed opinions seem to be the rage these days. What I will say is that I became curious about those books. One of them brings us back to racial justice and to the emotional and spiritual repercussions of racism. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison is about a black girl named Pecola Breedlove, who as a result of racist voices which not only made it to her ears, but into her mind and to her heart as well, she had tragically become ashamed of her own blackness. I want to read you a New York Times summary of the novel. Pecola Breedlove is an 11-year-old black girl in an America whose love for its fair-skinned, blonde, blue-eyed children can devastate all others. She prays for her eyes to turn blue so that she will be beautiful also, so that people will look at her, so that her world will be different. This is the story of the nightmare at the heart of her yearning. I've heard the heartfelt testimonies of more than one parent of color who says that the greatest challenge in their life as a parent is of convincing their black and brown children of their somebodyness. It's the word I've heard, their somebodyness. A somebodyness denied in too many subtle and sometimes not subtle of ways. And I say to you that knowing such struggles exist reminds us once again that we were made for more than that. Who is it among us who feels isolated, cut off, and ashamed? Mark offers us this picture of an encounter between Jesus and one who is experiencing isolation and shame in a soul-crushing way. Mark says that Jesus was moved to pity. Then he includes a detail that I find vastly important. And something that was just as healing as the physical act of healing itself. Mark says that Jesus stretched out his hand and touched the untouchable. Our translation in the New Revised Standard Version, along with most modern translations, read the same way, that Jesus was moved with pity. But in older translations closer to the original and likely more reliable, the text reads, Jesus was moved to anger. Jesus was moved to anger by a world and religious institutions which had normalized the isolation and the shaming of people. It seems that for Jesus, there was nothing normal about that, and Jesus' life and ministry from this moment on would declare in no uncertain terms that we as a human race were made for more than that. So we, the church that bears Christ's name, if that is true, then our marching orders are clear. Returning to the words of the great Nelson Mandela, doesn't hurt to hear them again. He said, I always knew that deep down in every human heart there is mercy and generosity. No one is born hating another person because of the color of the skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, then they can learn to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than hate. The hatred of racism, no matter how common it is, no matter how prevalent it is, no matter how resistant it is, to all the efforts that have been made to eradicate it, it is not normal. It is not what human beings were made to be. It isn't a normal quality inherent in the hearts of human beings. Children are not born to hate. They're not born to hate because of race or, for that matter, ethnicity or sexual orientation or gender identity or any other qualities which make this a diverse and colorful world. It is learned in every case. And if it is learned, it is incumbent on all people of goodwill that we teach our children differently. And that if it has already been learned, to unlearn it. And in the loudest and most prophetic of voices that we can muster, to claim that we were made for more. I want to conclude by talking about the Grammy Awards. They were on last Sunday. And among the songs which performed live was a song called Fast Car. It's originally recorded in 1988 by Tracy Chapman a black lesbian woman. It was remade in 2023 by Luke Combs, who would never be mistaken for a black lesbian woman. Luke, whose music is fantastic, I guess, and I say this in kindness, he looks like a good-natured redneck. And perhaps that's what he is. Besides being immensely talented, the two don't have much in common at all. But they sang that duet together, sang that song together. Their harmony was absolutely amazing. And their mutual respect and appreciation for one another was evident for everyone to see. The song, as best I can tell, is about discovering one's somebodyness in the world, the struggle to make it, the struggle to make it in life with the people that we love, all the challenges that come with being somebody. There's a line in the song that says, as I remember it, I felt like I belonged. I felt like I could be someone, be someone, be someone. Well, as they sang this, in case you didn't see it, this room full of artists and famous musicians, they were moved to deep emotion, deep emotion. Social media started to give a reflection of it all. We would learn that America was in large part moved to deep emotion. And one social media presence put it in a way that I agree and I will borrow this morning. People were moved to deep emotion because we Americans, we long for connection. And we long for connection across the divides which poison the soul of our country. And I would add this. We were moved to deep emotion because we know deep in our hearts that as we face those divisions and the brokenness that they cause in us all, we don't need a preacher to tell us because we know it in here. We were made for something more. And let the day that it comes, let it come soon. Will you pray with me as we close? Lord, protect all of our children from hatred. Keep every form of hatred out of their hearts. And Lord, protect us from hatred as well. And fill our souls with the love for which we were made. Lord, give us a vision of the more that we can be, and then give us the energy to work day and night until we become that more that you made us for. In the name of Christ and in the name of love, we pray. Amen.